pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Person? Mr. Prince?
Here.
Ms. Breyer?
Here.
Mr. Pavoni?
Here.
Mr. Taylor? Mr. Corman?
Here.
Ms. Palmer?
Here.
Roll call, Mr. Mayor, 2 absent.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Corman.
I move the absent council members be excused.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Corman, seconded by Ms. Breyer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. All right, we've got a proclamation.
Okay, proclamation, National Walking Day. Whereas cardiovascular diseases, including coronary heart disease and stroke, are the nation's leading cause of death and a leading cause of disability, with 915,000 Americans suffering a new or recurrent heart attack each year and 795,000 suffering a new or recurrent stroke. And whereas today, about 1 in 3 American kids and teens is overweight or obese, and childhood obesity is now the top health concern among parents in the United States. And whereas regular physical activity can reduce cardiovascular disease risk and may increase life expectancy, and whereas studies indicate that one of the best investments we can make in our communities is to increase access to physical activity opportunities by providing families and children with safe places to walk and be physically active in order to improve heart health and reduce obesity rates. Now therefore, I, Dennis Law, Mayor of the City of Renton, recognizing the importance of regular physical activity, do hereby proclaim April 2nd, 2014 as National Walking Day in the City of Renton, and I encourage all citizens to show their support for walking in the fight against heart disease and commemorate this day by taking time to walk. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Renton to be affixed this 24th day of March 2014, signed by Dennis Law, Mayor of the City of Renton.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Corman.
I move the council concur in the proclamation.
Second.
Motion by Corman, second by Breyer. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. This proclamation is going to my really good friend, Cherish Hart, the Senior Community Health Director for the American Heart Association and American Stroke Association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to thank the City of Renton for making this proclamation. For us at the American Heart Association, it is really a personal mission because we do believe that if there is any magic bullet to becoming more heart healthy, it's getting out there and getting more physical activity, which luckily is something we can all do. And walking is one of those great exercises that most people can do, and the City of Renton has some amazing places to get out and walk. So I think it's a great thing for you guys to get behind and really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. We've got a special presentation that I think a good chunk of our crowd's here for. Energize East Side, Mr. Zimmerman.
Mayor Prince, members of the council, I'm Greg Zimmerman, Renton's Public Works Administrator, and I also serve as Renton's representative on the Puget Sound Energy's East Side Citizens Advisory Group. As you know, Puget Sound Energy is proposing to upgrade their transmission system on the east side of Lake Washington by installing a new 230 kilovolt transmission line between the Talbot Hill substation in Renton and the Sammamish substation up in Redmond. That's about an 18-mile run. They need this upgrade to be built in 2017 in order for the capacity of the power transmission system in their grid to keep up with growth on the east side. Puget Sound Energy's identified 2 alternative routes in Renton. The existing route, which is called the M line, that runs north-south through Renton, the Renton Highlands, and a new route, L, that would run on the former Burlington Northern Railroad tracks along the lake. I'd like to remind all of the residents that may be watching that this is a Puget Sound energy project, and Renton and the other cities along the proposed route are reviewing the proposal, just as are the residents that live in the communities along those routes. Many residents have received in the mail a notice from Puget Sound Energy, notices that have gone out that look like this. And the notices tell of an upcoming workshop on this project to obtain input from the residents on the proposed alternatives. This workshop will be held this coming Thursday, March 27th, at Renton Technical College, 3000 Northeast 4th Street in Renton. It's at Building I, the Robert C. Roberts Campus Center Cafeteria, from 6:30 to 9 o'clock p.m. It's a pretty important workshop for representatives and members of the community to express their opinions and to learn more about the proposal. So once again, that's happening this Thursday, March 27th, at Renton Technical College. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Andy Wappler. He's the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Puget Sound Energy, who will be making this evening's presentation, along with Leanne Kostak, who's Puget Sound Energy's project manager for Energize East Side. Mr. Wappler is responsible for Puget Sound Energy's relations with communities and major customers, and for the company's communications. Mr. Wappler's background includes communication roles with the Washington Roundtable, the Boeing Company, as well as being a meteorologist for some of the region's top television, newspaper, and radio outlets. Mr. Wappler?
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it very much. In fact, yes, I worked for Boeing down here in Renton back in the early 90s, many years ago, and appreciate having the chance to be here this evening to talk about this project. And certainly it's really that history on the east side that is really why we're talking about this project here today. We've had a lot of growth on the east side, and really thinking about the east side in terms of the 405 corridor from Renton north up through Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond, and how different that corridor is today, and how different it is in terms of the number of people in the area, but also the fact that our area on the east side has become more urbanized. Years ago, there were some businesses, some jobs in the east side, but in fact now, many people who live on the east side don't just live here, they also work here as well. And we expect to see more of that growth. I also lead at PSE our energy efficiency group, and know that in the future, energy efficiency and conservation are going to be an extremely important part of meeting that energy demand, but only part of meeting that energy demand. Part of it is also infrastructure, simply bringing the power to your home or your business. And we're talking to the community about how do we do that and what's the best way to do that. And I'd emphasize, in terms of working with the community, it's great to have people who are here tonight. These are our customers. They're also our neighbors, because our folks live and work in the same communities as well. So we want this public process to be robust, because we know it's not an easy choice. We know everybody wants the lights to stay on. They want jobs and things to come to our community. But the way you get there can be a challenge. Talk a little bit here about the project, and just one picture first. When before I came to PSE 2008, if somebody said the word transmission line, that's what I would have thought of, the biggest kind of thing you could think of. It's not what we're dealing with in this case. We're still talking about a single pole, not this kind of lattice work style. We'll show some representative pictures a bit later, but I just want to throw that out in the beginning, because I think when you say transmission, that's probably where most people's minds go to. On the east side, we've grown a lot. The picture in the lower corner there is not too far from here in Renton, just about 90 years ago. So a little bit different view of Renton, a couple blocks to the north of this area. But the growth has been across the east side, whether it's Renton or the other cities. And at that time, we had a very low voltage system on the east side. You flash forward to the 50s and 60s, and that's when we began to actually upgrade the facility. This is Renton in the 1930s, and then you go a bit forward here to the 50s and 60s, and all of a sudden now you end up with our Renton of today. And of course, you end up with more people here, including many fans of those guys, the Seahawks, and more businesses as well. And to me, as someone who worked at Boeing, I think about the history here in a different way, which is your production rate in Renton. And when I worked at Boeing in the early 90s, I remember it was a big deal. They were talking about a production rate that would get into the mid to upper 20s. Well, now we're talking about something close to double that. And of course, the people to get those planes built. So a lot of growth around the area. Renton, one of the fastest growing cities, and incidentally, one of the larger cities to begin with, and still posting a very fast growth rate. These are numbers from the Puget Sound Regional Council, estimating that over the next few decades, Renton's population will grow by roughly a third. Much of that growth also coming in terms of jobs, and that population growth expected to take you to 101,000 population here in just a few years from the mid-90s today. And if you reference backwards, the last time we upgraded the transmission system here on the east side to its current level was around 1960. At that point, Renton's population, I think, was around 15,000 people. So we're looking to be about 6-7 times that level today with growth out into the future, and that growth continuing not just in Renton, but the rest of the east side. And here's where the issue comes in. On this chart, the dotted and dashed line is the current capacity of the system today. And it's just over 700 megawatts of energy that the transmission system can provide today. And that is the level at which, when you go past it, you begin to see reliability issues. And so that line that's the smooth line that goes up, that's really where we see that crossover point becoming likely to happen. Today, our demand is less than that maximum capacity. In the future, we expect that energy demand to cross over that point, and that crossover point to come sometime around 2017, 2018, so not too long from now. The issue there is that when you cross over at that point, you don't expect that suddenly you'll see the lights go out everywhere. It's not the case that the moment you're over that line, everybody's into a blackout. But like any piece of machinery, when you run it above its capacity for prolonged periods of time, you begin to have reliability issues. And two notes about this chart. It comes on, we measure this on a day that's a cool day in the area. So our planning standard is 23 degrees at SeaTac. And that 23-degree temperature is something we don't hit every winter. Our typical cool days in the winter in December, January are in the mid-30s. But most winters we get down into the 20s. Some winters multiple times. Some winters even down into the teens. And some winters not at all. But that's our planning standard because we understand that realistically we'll be down into the low 20s fairly often, if not every winter. Second piece about this chart that's important is that demand line going up in the future. That's based on the assumption that energy efficiency continues to be very important and a very big part of meeting energy demand. Today we have about 100 people in our energy efficiency group. They do about $100 million worth of grants and rebates to our customers. Some of those are the discounted light bulbs that people buy at, say, the club stores. Some of those grants and rebates go to cities. Some of those go to businesses where, if they're building a new business, our engineer will come in and help them be more efficient. We expect that that will continue. And in fact, energy efficiency is actually part of the law. If you remember back to 2006, voters in Washington approved what was called Initiative 937, and I think it grabbed more headlines for its renewable energy component, the idea that it mandated a certain amount of energy from things like wind and solar. But the other component, may be less exciting, but just as important as a utility, is energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is not only part of our plan, it's part of the law. So this graph assumes that energy efficiency continues and continues to make a real difference. Trouble is, it can't make all the difference. And so we see it as a two-part solution, energy efficiency, but also improving that infrastructure. And on the east side, the key to that is the last time since that real big upgrade was made. And we'll talk a little bit about the system here on the east side for a moment. Today, power on the east side is delivered at a couple levels. That purple line that came in, that's the higher voltage that is here in East King County. But you notice it's significantly east of the 405 corridor. It makes kind of a backwards C shape from our Sammamish substation in the north, which is actually in the Redmond area. That Sammamish substation goes east. That 230 line goes down across the Sammamish Plateau to Issaquah, and then comes west to the Talbot Hill substation, which is not too far up the hill from here. Now, I'll add in what is the current lower voltage transmission system that serves the 405 corridor. That's the blue lines. And the one that comes from the Sammamish substation all the way down and connects to Talbot Hill in Renton, that is the existing transmission corridor that we have on the east side today. And that's the corridor that was last upgraded around 1960, when we were looking at a population, say, in Renton of around 15,000 people or so. The trouble is, the peak energy demand today is along that corridor where we don't have the higher capacity lines. Those higher capacity lines are from the Sammamish substation out east, over the plateau, back to the west to Renton. but not connecting that core east side from north to south. And the red and orange here show the heavier demand areas. And as you can see, as this area has become more urbanized, that heavier demand pretty much paints from north to south along 405. So the need here is to add capacity to that north-south corridor to meet that heavy demand. And I'll take you back a couple years ago. This is June 2011. We had a fire at that major substation in Sammamish. Made a lot of smoke because the mineral oil that is the coolant for the transmission system there, or for the transformers that are there, that fire happened on a perfect day, if you can have a fire like that. And by that I mean, if you look closely at the picture, it's a cloudy June day. Imagine that around here. A cloudy June day, it's maybe 70 degrees that day. That's about our lowest demand time for energy. A warm but not hot summer day, that's when our area is using the least amount of energy. Well, when that fire happened, we still had enough capacity in the system today that we could route power from one end to the north, from the south up to the north. And that meant that the outages that were a result of that were fairly limited. It was a couple hours, about 15 to 20,000 customers. Now, as the system reaches its capacity, and if something like that happens, say on a cold winter morning when we're using a lot of energy, then you don't have enough backup power because the system doesn't have the capacity to deliver power to the number of users there are today. That means you end up with a much more widespread, longer power outage to a very widespread area. And in this case, that fire was at the north end, but the dynamic is the same. If it were in the south, you couldn't get the power from the north and vice versa. And that's what it means that as the system becomes overloaded over time, you begin to have reliability issues. And these are a little different than the kinds of reliability you have when it's windy and a tree limb comes down. This is the kind of reliability you get from simply running the system past its capacity day after day. Our solution then, in addition to the conservation portion, is to add to that transmission infrastructure and upgrade it to meet the demands we're putting on it today as a community. We can look at some of the segments and things and talk about what we're proposing. And these are the segments that we're looking at. All we need to do is to connect from the south to the north. How we do that, we're impartial to. We are frequently asked by the public, do we have a preferred line? We don't. We have a preferred solution, which is keeping the lights on, but in terms of how we do that, we don't have a preference. The segments that are probably most important to folks here are the segments at the south, the N, L, and M. Those are the segments that are in some places in the Renton area, although the M also extends north to Newcastle and South Bellevue, and the same with the L segment as well. But M, N, and L. Now, the segments also are where we do have some facilities today. This is the L segment closer along the Lake Washington Boulevard. That's where we have some of that 115-volt system that's there today, and you can see the pole for that. Then this is the segment where the existing corridor that runs all the way from the north to the south is. This is up on Sunset, and that system today is 2 of these wooden H-frames, each with 3 wires. And it's a bit of confusing utility jargon. 3 wires makes 1 transmission line. And it's a little bit like, I guess, having the 3-pronged plug when you plug something in. So this is actually 2 lines, even though it's 6 wires. And since Leanne's an engineer, she can tell us why if we need to know that in a bit. But just to make it clear that that's when we say transmission line, it actually could be composed of multiple wires. So that's how things look in this area today. How they could look in the future, there are a number of different pole configurations that are possible, but this shows something of the type that we're talking about. On the left is a single pole, what's called the self-weathering pole. They tend to kind of rust in, and to some people's eye blend in a bit more because they come kind of brown and they become a bit more varicolored. The other is a galvanized pole. So they're different configurations, different heights. In general, and it depends a bit on what terrain you're going over, the existing double wooden H-frames are about 70 feet. What we're looking at here is about 100 feet. And there's a lot of variation depending on what you're going over, what the terrain is. Also, as a general rule, you can go with lower poles if you put them closer together, or taller poles if you put them farther apart because the line sags a bit. So there's a bit of variation in terms of what you can do to get this done and what you have to do depending on what you're building over. So that's a bit of a sense of what the lines look like. Now, the question comes up, of course, what about undergrounding? That's a good question. Today, about 0.5% of transmission lines in the United States are underground, and a bit more than 1% in Europe. So it's a fairly small number that are underground, and it is mainly in the most dense urban core. And here's a couple reasons as to why. As a cost comparison, it is much more expensive to be underground versus overhead. The construction cost is around $20 to $28 million a mile for underground and $3 to $4 million per mile for overhead. There are other aspects then of the cost as well. This is the engineering, labor, materials. There are other pieces that go into it. Typically, and this may seem a little bit counterintuitive, you actually have to buy more land if you build underground. You also have more in terms of complexity of other things that you might have to move and pay for in the process if you go underground, other things that are already there. So a number of different pieces that go into the undergrounding. And in Washington, undergrounding of transmission lines is viewed very different in terms of how it is paid for than other kinds of utility improvements. And we'll talk a bit about that difference. When we make an investment in the system for our customers today, typically that investment, if it's for reliability and general service, all of our customers pay for. So if we make an improvement to a substation in Renton, all of our customers around the area pay for that. The same thing if we make an improvement to our substation in Bremerton, all of our customers, Redmond, Renton, elsewhere, would pay for that as well. And that's because the belief in the regulation is that society benefits when our region as a whole has strong, reliable electric grid. But because the undergrounding is viewed as an aesthetic choice versus something that's a need to deliver service, in Washington, the community that chooses undergrounding has to pay for the undergrounding. And the payment comes at the beginning of the process as opposed to the end. And as we looked at a moment ago, it's a significant amount of money per mile, someplace in that $20 or more million a mile. The other aspect of undergrounding, in addition to the cost, in terms of its impact, it is a high impact construction process, and there is impact ongoing in terms of what you have to live with. On the left are the underground vaults that need to be put in about every quarter to half mile. You put the cable into conduit, then you need an access vault fairly frequently, again, quarter to half mile. And those vaults, for give you a sense of scale, they're about the size of a two-car garage, and you need to then have the area above that to be clear for access. There's a look inside the vault with the picture there on the right. And the reason you need that is if there's a failure with the cables, you have to be able to get in, separate the cables, splice them, replace the cables, all of that. The other aspect of the undergrounding that I think also may be a little counterintuitive, if you think of our typical storms and impacts here in Washington, we tend to think of the damage from things that are overhead, from things that are trees that are coming down. Transmission line, trees generally not a big problem. But underground, your issues in terms of maintenance and reliability come from wet weather, flooding, corrosion that happens underground, as well as in warm weather, buildup of heat. Part of the reason the electric infrastructure is above ground is it can cool off well that way. In the summertime, when there is demand, those lines become warm, and when they're underground, they're hard to cool. So it is a bit of a trade-off of one kind of reliability versus another. Really shorthand, if you have underground, you're likely to have fewer outages, but longer outages when you do have them. And it is a pretty involved construction process in that you need to clear more trees, all the trees in the corridor, not just trimming trees, but all the trees, dig that trench, build that vault. It's a big construction process. And again, that may be part of the reason why in the United States, a little over 99% of the transmission system is above ground in the country. So that's a little bit of a look at undergrounding. I want to talk a bit about the public process. To say, we know we're not just doing this someplace. We know we're doing it in a community that we live in and work in. We know we're doing it to serve our customers. So we want to have a public process to hear from folks, hear what it's on their minds, where they'd like things to be, how they'd like them to look. And we have a couple different steps involved in doing that. We have a very open commenting process. We'd like to have people on our mailing list. We want people to come to the meetings. I'm very glad Greg mentioned the meeting that's here on Thursday. And we have a community advisory group, which Greg and others are serving on here in the community. And I'll talk a bit more about that and who's on that group here from Renton. From the city, we have Greg. From Renton Chamber of Commerce, Lynn Wallace, Steve Hansen from Renton Technical College, and then from the community, Darius Richards is representing the Kennydale community, and then as an alternate to the community advisory group, Bill Taylor from the Liberty Ridge area. And the community advisory group itself is about 25, and then below that, as this chart shows, we have what we're calling sub-area committees, because we know that neighborhood sensitivities are important. We held our first neighborhood sub-area committee last week for the North Group, which is the Redmond-Kirkland area. Wednesday night, we are in Bellevue for that Central Group, and then Thursday night, the South Group. And each of those groups will get a chance to look at the segments, how they interrelate, and hopefully to get their technical questions about the siting process, construction, environmental, all the other pieces that go into this. So here's the map again of kind of these sub-areas, the north, the central, and the south. In some cases, these are municipal lines, but mostly they are more who's affected by a segment. So in the south, for example, we have some folks who live in Bellevue who might be interested in segment L. We also have folks in Renton, Kennydale, and Newcastle who might be interested as well. And that process then again is ongoing now. We'll have 3 flights of those meetings here throughout this spring, with the first for the South Group on Thursday night. Here's the list of all the meetings that are coming up, at least for the spring. And then as those are proceeding, we also will have people be able to look on online tools and make their comments as well. So for folks who are not comfortable or able to come to a meeting, all the people who are participating on the community advisory group will get the online comments and the written comments as well. And the different engineering and technical reports that we're giving to the people on the community advisory group, those can be accessed by the public on the website as well if someone wants to click and read that kind of thing independently. So here's the timeline for the project. The public process is important. We've allocated all of 2014 for that. We will not begin to file a permit until 2015. So 2014 is really the year of public engagement. Some aspects of the permitting that would occur regardless of which segment is chosen will take place later this year. Some of the environmental and other pieces are sort of blanket to the area, but the specific permits for the actual identified route will not happen until early in 2015. We want to use the community advisory groups to get input. We do know in the end that it is a choice that we will have to make, because we have a responsibility to 200,000 to 300,000 people who depend upon this line for either their home or their livelihood. But we want to get as much information as we can so that we can make the best choice that we have. And I'd certainly like to take your questions, and Leanne as well as the engineer and project manager. And if you have technical questions, she can answer those as well.
Questions from council?
I have one question. Are you going to stay for our audience comment?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And let me just touch on one thing too that I think I left out that's important in terms of why the routes, why the segments. We used a tool to help us maximize what was either existing utility right-of-way, because we know we need to go from the south to the north. We need to make that connection. So what are the paths that would allow us to connect and use the maximum possible amount that is already used for some kind of public purpose? Number one, the utility. That seemed to make sense to use that, as well as any other potential public right-of-way. We also looked at, there's another corridor along the line that is a Seattle City Light corridor. We did talk to Seattle City Light about using their corridor, but I think if you asked them for their kind of demand and capacity graph, like I showed for ours, theirs would look very much the same. And their response was that they need that corridor and that capacity they have today to serve a customer base that, like ours, has also grown tremendously over the years. So we did look at some of those alternatives. Unfortunately, in an area that is fairly constricted geographically, there are not many. There are not many corridors that take you from the south in this area to the north. And that was why we had the M, which is our existing path today, and the L, which would use the Burlington Northern right-of-way.
Mr. Corman?
Yes, can I ask you, maybe if, on the subject of routes, could you go all the way back in the presentation to the map that showed where you had the high capacity line going north and south through Issaquah, and you showed how it was too far to the east, really.
Yes.
So is that line a, so that is a high-capacity line, the one that goes through Issaquah?
That is a 230 kilovolt line.
And the one you're proposing that would go through Renton is, what's the kilovoltage of that one?
Also 230.
Okay, so I do have a question. When you kind of went to the next presentation, or the next page, and you showed that you showed where the growth is, okay, this is a good page. I noticed that, the heaviest parts of the growth are not down in the Renton area, but north. And so one thing I wonder is, has the utility looked at running a line along the I-90 corridor to go from the line which has more than enough capacity in Issaquah, cut over to Bellevue where it's needed, and then go north and just leave us out of it?
We did, but if we did that, we wouldn't have any redundancy to serve your area. So your area is also growing and would be served by one path coming in from the east and not two, which would leave Renton vulnerable if anything happened.
But
with that
it
one
could be
path.
served from both the north and the south, right? It could be served from where I-90 and 405 cross from the north, and it could be served from the Talbot Hill from the south, right?
Well, if we don't have the 230 connection that runs from north to south, we can't do that.
Well, wouldn't the existing connection, the 115 can't feed the entire east side, and I get that. If you have a fire up near Sammamish, it can't feed the whole east side, but it seems like it could certainly feed, Renton, right? I mean, that's just a third or a fourth of the capacity.
You are certainly a smaller portion of the capacity, but we do anticipate growth here too. And looking out into the future, not just the snapshot of today,
Yeah.
but what are you going to need in the future? And looking at Renton's expected growth rate, yes, the capacity may be there today, but it won't be there for long.
Do you know if that was even looked at, or is it an
We
alternative?
looked at a number of solutions. We also looked at, could we put new generation someplace on the east side? But again, even if you put a new power plant there, you need the ability to get the power from that power plant to where people
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
And again, we also looked at even, could you just simply max out on conservation? Would that take you there? Try to look at a number of different scenarios.
It just strikes me when I look at this map and look at the usage that there's two solutions. You can look and say, okay, we need to come from Talbot Hill up to Bellevue to serve it, or you could say we need to come from Issaquah over to Bellevue to serve it north. So that's all I just wanted to point out. It's not obvious to me that the Renton solution's better, but.
Any other questions from council? Thank you, guys, and thank you for sticking around for audience comment.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Administrative report, Mr. Covington.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, a couple of items. Wanted to announce first and congratulate our 3 Special Olympics basketball teams from our Renton Specialized Recreation Program. They qualified for the state tournament, which was held February 28th through March 2nd in Wenatchee. During the state tournament, the Masters 3 division, Renton Wizards, beat the #1 seed to win the gold medal. The Masters 6 division, Renton Wildcats, came in 3rd place, and the skills team, Renton Rebounders, came in 4th place with their all-time best score in competition. Congratulations to all 3 teams and players. And then I wanted to also mention, brag a little bit about one of our employees. You heard last week in the Mayor's State of the City address a discussion about Renton's involvement in trying to be more environmentally friendly, and we've been working for several years in a number of climate friendly initiatives, and we got one of our staff members, Chris Sorensen, who's an assistant planner in our Community and Economic Development Department, was honored with the 2014 Leadership in Green Building and Climate Collaboration Award from King County Green Tools. This is a multi-jurisdictional group that provides technical assistance, grants, and hands-on training to help users create green products or projects efficiently and effectively throughout the county. Chris has been representing us for several years and working to implement our own green economy strategy. So we wanted to congratulate Chris on his award. This is the award he received. I think he's here this evening.
in the back.
There he is. I believe he has his son here with him too, Mr. Mayor. So if you wouldn't mind coming up and you can re-present this to Chris. There you go.
Very good, Chris.
Congratulations, Chris.
Sneak out the side door. Thanks.
That complete your report?
That completes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Audience comment. We have a number of people signed up for audience comment. When you come to the podium, please state your name and city of residence. For the record, spelling your last name. We have a timer here. Green, yellow, and red. At the end, red, when red flashes, your time is up. First up, Inez Peterson.
Inez Peterson, Petersen, Renton attorney and editor of the Underdog Law Report to the City Council that I do every week. This week, I have a saying at the top that says a free debate of ideas often results in the wisest government actions. Now, I don't know where I got that little saying, but I know somebody important said it because I put quotes around it in my newsletter, and it didn't come from me. But the state Supreme Court, I do know where this quote came from, and they made it in a case called 1,000 Friends of Washington versus McFarland. And the justices say, "We do not take lightly the concerns expressed by McFarland and his supporting briefs regarding the vital importance of the rights of local citizens to participate in policy decisions affecting their communities, and we will take a very hard look at any attempt to limit public participation." So based on that, and on one of the many emails I'm getting lately from the citizens of Renton concerning developer favoritism, there's 4 provisions of the Growth Management Act that I think relate to this picture, and this is Whinstone. RCW 36.70A.060 subparagraph 2 requires each county and city to adopt development regulations that protect critical areas like May Creek. RCW 36.70A.030 subparagraph 5 actually defines the critical areas like May Creek. RCW 36.70A.172 subparagraph 1 requires designation and protection of the critical areas, and this is to be done according to the best available science. And then there's also a WAC that concerns best available science. So I ask you, is this pipe diverting water into the public street, which will then drain ultimately into May Creek, would anyone call that the best available science? Would anyone call that in the interest of maintaining the May Creek as a critical area? And lastly, when a citizen contacts the city about this, and this is where my fortune cookie excuse jar comes in, because I don't see how you can justify what happened on this. A citizen sent an email to the city pointing this out, and they were told, because they didn't live within the city, to go away. That isn't how it should work. That's not best available science. May Creek needs to be protected, and even citizens outside the area should have a voice on subjects that are so important that the state has a specific statute. And speaking of specific statutes, we have the Shoreline Management Act, and how anyone can put a 2-mile stretch of these electric towers in the shoreline management area down the railroad corridor is beyond me. Especially considering the special geologic problems that are inherent along Kennydale and the people's homes there, like along Ripley Lane, where the underground seepage is so significant their foundations actually move to the lake. And so what is going to happen to these power lines? Are they going to move to the lake? They should probably move somewhere else. Thank you.
Next up, Howard McCumber.
I'm Howard McComber. I live in the Renton Highlands. You've seen me here every week for many years, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. Two things. Number one, before I go into that, many of you know Sandel Domestis, and we're having a special commemoration of her life down at the Community Center, 800 Edmonds Avenue, on April the 6th, that's Sunday, between 3 and 5. And Sandel was the lady who made a lot of things very positive here. And she was also a party girl, and so we're suggesting that people would like to come make it a potluck, bring comfort food. Probably not super healthy food, but really delicious stuff. That would be nice, and we will remember this person who did so much for our community. Her heart was pure, she tried her very best, and she did to the end, and she was a volunteer. I think one of the things that's most important here are our ability to cooperate and work together. Randy, I want to give you a tremendous compliment. You have a great mind, and you can take a look at things that are simple.
Thanks.
Sometimes people give you a choice of A or B. And sometimes, my wife said, Howard, it's not A or B, it's going to be C. There's another alternative that's better. There's another way to do it that impacts people less. And so I know that sometimes our Renton Highlands is not as filled with intelligent, highly educated people with as much influence as the lake people. We're not throwing them under the bus. We're not going out that way. We're staying with everybody. We believe that everybody's important equally, everybody's precious, and everybody needs to be taken care of. Now I realize you guys don't really get to have so much control over this, but you have influence, and we'd like to have the influence felt. I think Randy's suggestion that there's another way is so important, and I think another way needs to be found, and you have that ability. So I think we need to take a good look. We need to look at a couple of factors. One of them is, Andy did a great job. Andy is, we've seen him with, everybody's seen him, so we all know Andy. But the thing is, we have two aspects here. One is aesthetic, and the other, I think, is kind of a safety issue. Some of those things all have to be brought in, and the impact on the communities that are there. And I think we might find a better method than either one that's being proposed. I know which one the power's going at, two different funds there, but we'll let that go. The problem is, we need to solve this very carefully. We need to be very careful and see if we can't find an alternative that works, or a mitigation that works very well. A mitigation that solves the problem. Everybody's going to have their own opinions on this, and you folks are very fair, and I know that you care. Everyone that I see up here is desirous of making the city of Renton the very best it can be. We all want to make sure there's plenty of power. That's not a question. The way to get it there is the question, and there are alternatives, and there are ways to make the alternatives better. And I think we need to look at those alternatives. I don't think we need to just say, oh, I think we'll take B. I don't think that's the answer at all. I think it's going to take more leadership than that, and you folks have leadership and ability, and we'll be certainly there giving you our comments and our support. Got my yellow light on. I'll pull off, but I want you to know that I appreciate you, and I think we have to keep our options open, and I think we also need to let Puget Sound Energy know that while we appreciate the power, it's very important how they handle this very important issue. Thank you.
Next up, Don Miller.
I'll hand this to you. Hello, my name is Don Miller, and I live in Bellevue. I represent the Lake Lanes Neighborhood Association. We exist between I-405 and the eastern shore of Lake Washington, from Newcastle Beach Park in Bellevue to the Seahawks facility in Renton. We don't fit in a single municipality, but we share concerns that makes our community values of being a neighborhood that is safe, served, and represented. No other neighborhood is being asked to shoulder the public good of 5 major projects in the coming years. The PSE Energize Eastside Transmission Line Project, the Eastside Rail Corridor, the expansion of I-405, the implementation of high-speed rail, and the replacement of the sewer line. That's a lot of public good for one neighborhood to take on. We are squeezed by all of these projects, and the first one coming is the PSE project. You've just heard a highly polished and heavily funded presentation from PSE on how they plan to increase their capacity to sell energy. I am here to represent my neighbors in opposition of Puget Sound Energy's high voltage transmission lines along the L route. This would put new high energy transmission lines in an existing neighborhood. PSE explained to you that the last time they did an upgrade, it lasted 50 years. This upgrade, they predict, will last 13 years. Puget Sound Energy has set up a process that pits neighborhood against neighborhood with a no-win solution for residents. When they set up their Citizen Advisory Group, or CAG, they failed to notify any resident along our segment of proposed Route L, even though we registered on their EnergizeEastside.com website. We don't feel that the CAG meeting structure is allowing for open discussion amongst the CAG members. For example, when CAG members initially suggested cooperation with Seattle City Light, this option was rejected. You've heard some really well rehearsed statements about why that won't work. It's an existing north-south corridor for energy that's existed for 80 years. We don't understand why putting a new infrastructure in an existing neighborhood makes sense when there are other corridors that could be used. Another thing to talk about is the undergrounding. In the last month, PSE's story on this has changed dramatically. On February 12th, members of the CAG inquired about undergrounding, and PSE personnel responded that undergrounding had not even been considered. They had stated the costs were high and would be borne by adjacent residents because it was considered aesthetic. On February 22nd, a town hall meeting was held by our representatives, Tana Sen and Judy Cliburn, as well as State Senator Steve Litzow, where 2/3 of the audience was there specifically about the concerns about the PSE project. Our representatives and senator were blindsided by this public outcry, but they rallied, and on March 4th, they held a teletown hall where they revealed that they'd been coached by PSE and were able to state that the cost for undergrounding was 6 times more expensive than using wires on poles. And on March 11th, PSE held a webinar on undergrounding, and as a part of this communication, they produced a 2-page document that states underground transmission systems are very reliable. Because lines are underground, they are less susceptible to storm-related outages. We ask that if PSE is genuine in their want for redundancy in their system, why are they trying to reject undergrounding? We ask that if undergrounding makes transmission systems very reliable, why wouldn't the cost be shared among all users, particularly if this makes the supply to our hospitals, businesses, and other key institutions more reliable? In conclusion, PSA has decided what they want and is forcing the public process to conform to their view rather than accept and consider the input of the communities they are affecting. We're asking for you to take a stand for your city on how this Canadian-owned corporation will be required to operate within your borders. Thank you.
Next up, Sally McClay.
My name's Sally McCray, and I live at 6815 Ripley Lane, Renton, Washington. My last name is spelled M-C-C-R-A-Y. And I am also here to talk about Puget Sound Energy's proposal. I would like to share the perspective of a woman who's lived and raised her children in this community for the last 2 decades. And I also share the sentiment that has been expressed by other community members that there is another alternative. But I specifically live along the proposed L line, so I'm going to share with you a few items of interest of why that line is not appropriate. The first reason that it's not appropriate is for you to take a look at where they're proposing that those towers be located. They are proposing that those large towers be located literally on the same horizontal plane as people's front doors and their garage doors. The towers are going to be right next to their property, and in fact, possibly the wires would go over their property. They didn't show you pictures of their proposed towers next to houses. They showed you pictures of their towers in wide corridors where nary a home was to be seen. But that's not what they're proposing to go through Renton and along Renton's jewel of the Coulon Beach Park. Even the federal government recognizes that there are hazards of being close to these lines. Specifically, the FHA will not insure loans that may endanger the health and safety of occupants and/or the structural integrity of the property. This includes residential structures located within the fall distance of high-voltage transmission lines. This is specifically and precisely what Puget Sound Energy is proposing to do along the L line, which runs through Renton. EMFs, electromagnetic fields, are controversial. Puget Sound Energy will tell you in their literature that there are no credible studies that show that there is any danger to human health. The California Public Utilities Commission has recently hired 3 scientists and epidemiologists to do a study of all of the existing studies, and they have not agreed with each other, but they have come up with the idea. One of the scientists thought there was a 55% chance and another a 95% chance that EMFs increase the likelihood of childhood leukemia. 40 to 80% chance of adult leukemia. 50 to 80% chance of adult brain cancer. Is this something that we really want to add to our neighborhoods? Is increased likelihood of these diseases? And I'd invite you to look at the full report. I've just named 3 of the diseases that these 3 scientists think that EMFs increase. This reminds me when I was a teenager thinking about whether I was going to smoke or not, of when I saw the cool people and good advertisements smoking the cigarette, and my mom and dad said, don't smoke, it's bad for your health. But the people from the tobacco company said there was no credible science saying that that nicotine caused cancer or any other form of illness. Time will tell, but it'll be too late because those lines will already be up there. And lastly, I want to say that I commend this council for listening, Randy and others for saying there are other alternatives. Being presented with take A or B is not it. The city of Renton needs to take a page from the city council of Mercer Island when they were presented with the fact that they needed to allow an increased volume of transportation to go across their neighborhoods. That was for the benefit of the entire state and the entire community. And they made lemonade out of the lemons by forcing the transportation department to give that community something to mitigate the things that were happening to it. Right now, Renton has an existing line going through that they're proposing be increased, the Seattle City Light line, and now proposing a 3rd line. That is not something that Renton needs. What we need to do is we need to have an improvement in the existing infrastructure, something that actually benefits the citizens and the people who live, work, and play in Renton. It needs to be something that makes Renton a better city. $20 million per mile sounds like a high cost. That's what Mr. Wappler has said the additional cost of undergrounding would be. Okay, let's put that in perspective. They spend $100 million a year giving away light bulbs. That's 5 miles. Over an 18-mile transmission line, that's 4 years' worth of free light bulbs that we're asking about for underlining through our cities. Thank you. Simple math. Puget Sound Energy's website does say that it's more reliable.
I'm
And-
sorry, your time's up.
Oh, thank you very much.
Ann Simpson.
Good evening, Council President, members of the City Council. I'd like to start by thanking Councilman Corman for being creative tonight. I mean, it was just really great coming right here in this meeting. There are other alternatives. But, so what will this project do to our communities and others within the newly proposed corridor of towering poles carrying 3 to 6 1.5-inch wires? Well, starting right now, it's dividing neighbors. PSE says they want consensus, and yet they are setting up a tactical divide and conquer scenario. You're going to see it right here tonight. What will it do along the L route? It'll put a scar along the shores of Lake Washington from Coulon Park to the I-90 and beyond. Thousands of people who enjoy the 4 parks along this route, Coulon, Kennydale, Newcastle Beach Park, and Mercer Slough, will see power poles instead of trees. Hundreds will be removed, absolutely the opposite of what parks are supposed to bring to their visitors. Trees and other vegetation that buffer noise and are so important to the peacefulness of our parks will be replaced with open, clear space and noise-reflecting steel poles. Is this how we want our city parks to look? While Seattle is busy figuring out how to beautify their shoreline, we are allowing PSE to force us into trashing ours. And then there is our hard-fought-for shoreline master program, one that protected the shoreline environment, property rights, and the enjoyment of and access to Lake Washington. As I said a couple of weeks ago to this council, how can a high-voltage power line possibly figure into the state's mandated vision of protecting our shorelines? Earlier this evening, Don Miller named several agencies and other interested parties who are unaware of Energize East Side, and I would like to add the Department of Ecology. Barbara Nightingale, Renton's DOE consultant, knew nothing of PSE's project. Now that the word of a possible high-voltage power line along the beautiful and protected shores of Lake Washington is spreading, disbelief is only a breath behind why.
Greg Cantanita.
My name is Greg Cantanita. I live at 7011 Ripley Lane, just a few houses outside of the border of Renton. I just want you to know that I really appreciate what you have been doing. I don't think you're here tonight because you earn a lot of money by sitting here or you want the fame. I think you're here because you want to make a difference. And so you're there trying to determine a legacy for the city of Renton. I have to tell you that my son and my 2 grandsons, they basically said the other day, the best park on the east side is Jean Coulon. They love coming down here and playing. And I am so proud of you for what you've done on the waterfront. And I look at the Seahawks training facility. I mean, I think it's a great use. I look at Barbie Mill site. You're doing some wonderful things, opening up the waterfront. And if I came to you tonight and I said, I want a permit to go ahead and build a series of structures that are the equivalent of 10-story buildings on the water in critical areas, you'd laugh me out of here. And that's what's being discussed here. I think Puget Sound Energy needs to be looking at undergrounding. I think they need to be looking at relative to the M corridor. I think the L corridor doesn't make sense at all. I think one of the things you should think about is the fact that ultimately there may be light rail running along the L corridor, in a sense, on the tracks. Light rail generates EMFs. Transmission lines generate EMFs. At some point, somebody's going to come out with certain standards saying how many EMFs are allowable. And by allowing transmission lines, you may undermine your ability to do light rail down the road. And so I just want you to think about the legacy of your administration, what you're trying to achieve on the water in Renton. You've done a great job so far. Let's not mess it up. Thank you so much.
Next up, Paul Olet.
Thank you. I'm Paul Olet, live in Rolling Hills. And for your information, I want to speak with authority tonight because I live in the middle of, within 2 blocks of the Talbot Hill substation. I'm surrounded by power poles, okay? And so I want to speak tonight in objection to the Puget Sound L route, but more than that, I think I want to support what Randy talked about tonight. And I think it's unfortunate to me that some of the council members are not here and the mayor is not here to witness this operation, what's going on here tonight. I think what you're faced with is the same situation that you had the problem with the library location. It's very key in what the decisions that you make. You may not be able to stop it because of the shoreline management or whatever, but there's got to be something that needs to be done. I'm sorry that PSC, I read in the paper the other day that the Renton City and PSC have a good relationship. If that's the case, you need to use that relationship to get them to do something different, okay? Unless I'm wrong, looking at the increase in power up at the north end in Redmond and the Sammamish Plateau is the reason that they need power. And like Randy said, why does it have to come from the Talbot Hill section? Why does it have to come that way? Okay? The presentation focused on the need to expand and the reasons for routing from Talbot Hill substation. And they talked about Renton growth. That's not where the growth really is. It's up north. It's Redmond, Kirkland, and all those areas up there. Bring the power to Sammamish some other way, from the east, from someplace else. Why does it have to come from Renton? I appreciate Randy's comments, but I was a little bit dismayed that not more of the council members present also had voiced some opinion about this or asked questions that could be responded by PSC. We can't. If you think you can trust PSC, okay, to use the least environmental impact as far as poles are concerned, I want to bring your attention to what happened when the state decided to have an extra exit off of 405 called the Talbot Hill exit, okay? All you need to do is drive up there next to Sam's and look at that mess of power poles, of power lines that they have. They did not use the expensive tall towers. They used all kinds of wood, the cheapest stuff possible. And it's a mess of trees. Okay, I'm going to read it. Can you imagine the drop in the valuation of those nice condos along Washington Boulevard? Okay, what's going to happen to that tax valuation? It's going to hit you in the pocketbook because the valuation is going to go down, their taxes are going to go down, and you're going to lose some money. It is plastered with power lines. Look at the forest of trees next to Sam's. Once they put a few towers in on the right-of-way, more will come. Why is it that Puget PSC purchased that right-of-way in the first place years ago when the price was cheap, when King County was looking for money to pay that rail line, okay? And to me, they had that in their heads a long time ago. In all respect to PSC and the representatives here, it is not necessarily them. I'm speaking of the large corporation, okay? The Monroe route is not really any better. I know that yellow is on, I'm sorry. It's going to be one neighborhood against the other, and it should not be. You should force PSC to go back to the drawing board and explain the reasons why it cannot be done some other way, whether it be the Seattle route, the Seattle City Light route, or even further east, or bring the power from some other way. Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. Breyer and then Ms. Palmer.
I just wanted to make a comment that Mr. Ouellette brought up. No, you can, just the fact that that we didn't ask questions. We've all had, on the council, have had several briefings with PSC, so we've asked a lot of our questions already, so I don't want you to be concerned that, that we're not interested in what's going on, or that we didn't have questions.
It's unfortunate that we did not get a chance to hear those observations, however, as
Yeah.
Ms. Palmer.
Well, that was exactly what I was going to say. Last week, the representatives came in and met with us one-on-one. We sat across the table and saw basically this exact same presentation and asked the questions and voiced the concerns. But I totally understand what you're saying, Paul.
Why was that not presentation, say, when the public could attend? Like
Can you come up to the mic? We can't hear you, Paul.
meeting with the council?
He said, why couldn't we have it where the whole public could hear? I think, in essence. Steve Layton, Lisa Lord?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
we've actually exceeded the 30-minute time limit for the first audience comment portion.
What's the wish of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Ms. Breyer.
move that we continue with audience comment.
Second.
Moved by Breyer, seconded by Palmer. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Steve Layton? Oh, okay. All right, so moving on to the consent agenda. We have 9 items on the consent agenda.
Oh, yes.
I can't do it, Randy.
Okay, well, I gotta turn my, my iPad back on here. Okay, I move approval of the consent agenda as published.
Second?
Moved by Corman, seconded by Palmer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Unfinished business. Ms. Breyer.
Yes, the Finance Committee has one committee report.
Okay, Finance Committee, conversion of a Fire Department Assistant Fire Marshal position. The Finance Committee recommends concurrence in the staff recommendation to approve the conversion of the Assistant Fire Marshal position, which is M26, to a Fire Marshal M38 position, effective April 1st, 2014, with the cost increase absorbed in the current Fire Department budget. This is signed by the committee chair and members.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Ms. Breyer.
move that council concur with the Finance Committee report.
Second?
Moved by Breyer, seconded by Palmer. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Mr. Pavoni.
No unfinished business, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Corman.
No committee reports to present. I guess, Mr. Mayor, though, I'm just thinking here, we probably should, clarify for people that have come here tonight, what's going to happen next, what we can and can't do relative to the power proposal. I guess like has been said, I'm glad we had a briefing. I'm glad we had a public briefing. I'm glad the public and we got to broadcast it on TV so people know what's going on. I think that we do not have that much authority, is my understanding, as a city. I think we do. I acknowledge we do kind of have bully pulpits in a way. We, each one of us could maybe use our own influence to try and help things. But the fact is, it's not our jurisdiction. And so I did want to make sure that people that wanted to speak on this topic didn't mistakenly believe that we were the ultimate sounding board or the party that had authority over it. And in fact, if it's not too much to ask, perhaps I should have coached him in advance that I might ask this, but could I ask the attorney to tell us a little bit about who who would decide this issue and?
Mr. Gorman?
Or Jay?
I was actually going to call up Mr. Zimmerman
Oh.
since he's on the
Perfect.
Community Advisory
Perfect.
Group.
That might be better. And just let people know, there's probably people that are hearing this on television tonight for the first time, and we would just want to make sure that that we don't become, the mail service trying to deliver their comments to another agency. I think it's important that they know who in the county and the state and what authority they should be contacting with their questions. So Greg, if you could kind of fill us in.
Yes, the city has the ability to sit in and review the options, and certainly we have permitting authority, and we can talk about mitigation, and we can talk about preferences for, even preferences for routes. I think as Puget Sound Energy stated, the final decision on the route is with Puget Sound Energy. My read, and I ran this quickly by the city attorney's office as well, of the tariffs, does indicate that Puget Sound Energy would be able to ask a community or a jurisdiction or a municipality to pay the difference if a undergrounding request was made. But I also think a very good point was made by a member of the public that possibly you could articulate, because of continuity of service and strength of service of the grid, that maybe it should be. Maybe there is an argument that it is in the interest of all of the ratepayers. So there's things that have to be looked at and discussed. We do have permitting authority, but I don't, to my knowledge, legally, and I'll also ask the city attorney to comment on this, I don't think that we have the authority as the city to say you can't do this.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
I
Warren.
might comment. The city has environmental review participatory authority. I believe that we have asked to become the lead agency for the Renton area portion of whatever is proposed to be built. The responsibility for the actual decision would rest with PSC, and their ultimate government overseer, if you would, is the State Utilities and Transportation Commission. And Greg is correct about the tariff 80, about undergrounding, but you can read the language. If PSC was the one that decided that that was the best alternative, it would be their choice, and they would be funding it. If there was individual communities that tried to use that as the option, the way the tariff is written, and I helped negotiate that tariff for the cities, and I will just tell you that the prior tariff to that was almost identical in costs, so it really didn't, Tariff 80 or its predecessor has been in place for many, many years. But if we, as a city, decided, for example, to insist on undergrounding, and PSC was not the one that made that choice, they would try and charge back to the cities. So that's probably more than you wanted to.
No, it's not more than in fact, so with regard to the undergrounding option, I mean, one thing that I'm really interested in, and I think I could ask them as well, but is just basic fairness. I'm really curious, we heard that cities have to pay this, but I'm curious, everywhere that it's been undergrounded, has it been paid for by the city, and I'm skeptical. And I'd like the comment we received tonight about Mercer Island getting a lid over the freeway. Mercer Island didn't pay for that lid. So what I don't want to find is that we're told now that the city always has to pay, only to see that that's not the case in another jurisdiction. And I'm going to personally be very watchful of that. And I guess I wonder, what it means that we're the lead agency, or if I have this concern, and maybe a member of the public has the same concern, is there a state utilities committee I can write to and say that I've been told this, that the city always pays, but can I get evidence that that's the case, but it would be, where would I go for that?
I think we could make that inquiry to the Washington Utilities and Transportation Committee. We will do that. and we'll
Okay.
see what kind of records they have on
Yeah.
that question.
Okay. And you know, I'll just say while I have the podium too, that the, you know, we were told, well, only 1 or 2% of power lines like this are actually undergrounded, but when you look at how far these things are feeding, you know, they're coming from, you know, hundreds of miles away. And so, yeah, having the last 5 miles where it goes right through an urban area be underground seems consistent with the 1 or 2%, you know, that's undergrounded. I think what would be inconsistent is to assume that the rural treatment where you have it on a high-rise tower is going to continue right through, you know, some of your most busiest neighborhoods. So I'd like to just have a place where people can address those concerns. And I'm afraid it's probably not going to be here. I mean, I'll probably be writing a letter just like everybody else from the city because I live in the Highlands too, you know, but in the end, you know, there's nothing I approve up or down as a councilman that decides this, as far as I can tell.
I think that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for that. I know that was a little strange unfinished business, but
That's okay, we needed to get that out there.
Good. That's good.
Ms. Palmer?
No unfinished business.
All right. On to resolutions and ordinances. We have 1 ordinance for first reading and 2 ordinances for second and final reading.
Okay, the first ordinance for first reading is regarding the gift and device of real property for a public park. An ordinance of the City of Renton, Washington, accepting the gift and device of certain real property in the last will and testament of Arthur R. Kenyon, deceased, upon the conditions stated therein.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Ms. Breyer.
I move this ordinance be placed on second and final reading at the next council meeting.
Second?
Moved by Breyer, seconded by Palmer. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
All right.
Okay, the first ordinance for second and final reading is regarding hearing examiner decision timeline. An ordinance of the City of Renton, Washington, amending Section 48110 of Chapter 8 Permits, General and Appeals of Title 4 Development Regulations of City Code by changing the period of time in which the hearing examiner shall render a final decision to be consistent with state law.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Ms. Breyer.
I move this ordinance be adopted as read.
Second?
Moved by Ms. Breyer, seconded by Ms. Palmer. This is second and final reading, so we need a roll call vote.
Hey, Mr. Prince?
Aye.
Ms. Breyer?
Aye.
Mr. Pavoni?
Aye.
Mr. Corman?
aye.
Ms. Palmer?
Aye.
Roll call, Mr. Mayor, all ayes.
Thank you. Ayes have it. Second ordinance.
All right, the next ordinance is regarding recreational marijuana. An ordinance of the City of Renton, Washington, amending Chapter 1, Administration and Enforcement, Sections 42060 and 42080 of Chapter 2, Zoning Districts, Uses and Standards, and Section 411090 and 411130 of Chapter 11, Definitions of Title 4, Development Regulations of City Code, by adding regulations and definitions related to the use, production, processing, and sales of recreational marijuana.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Ms. Breyer.
I move this ordinance be adopted as read.
Second?
Moved by Ms. Breyer, seconded by Mr. Corman. This is a second and final reading, so we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Prince?
Aye.
Ms. Breyer?
Aye.
Mr. Pavoni?
Aye.
Mr. Corman?
Aye.
Ms. Palmer?
Aye.
Roll call, Mr. Mayor, all ayes.
The ayes have it. Moving on to new business. Ms. Breyer.
Yes, let's see, the Finance Committee, I'm sure it's on here. Oh, there, it isn't on here. All right. I have nothing to announce.
Mr. Pavoni.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have Utility Committee meeting. We'll meet on April 7th at 3:30. We have 2 items on the agenda. The first one is the Lower Cedar River Restoration Assessment Project, Puget Sound Acquisition and Restoration Project Agreement number 14-1020P. And the second one is the Maplewood Creek Stormwater Outfall Improvements Project, contract with BH Consultants. That is it.
Thank you. Mr. Corman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I actually get to cover for 4 people tonight, counting yourself, since you're doing such a good job as mayor and not
Thank you, sir.
Planning Development Committee Chair tonight. And so, for you, I'm going to go ahead and announce that there is a Planning and Development Committee meeting on Thursday, March 27th, 3:30 to 4 o'clock p.m. And
3:30 or 3?
it's 3:30, yes.
Yes, there was an
Thank you,
amendment.
right. So go ahead and clarify your written material. 3:30 to 4 o'clock p.m. That's in the council conference room. There's one item on that agenda, and that's building and fire codes adoption. And then for Councilman Taylor, I'm going to go ahead and announce a cancellation of the Community Services Committee that would have been held Monday, April 7th at 4 o'clock. So that meeting has been canceled. And then on behalf of myself, I am going to go ahead and announce that on April 7th, we will have a Public Safety Committee meeting from 4 o'clock to 4:30 p.m., and that's in the council conference room. There's two items on that agenda. One is the ordinance amending the definition of administrator in RMC 132, and the second item is building and fire code adoption briefing. And then finally, on behalf of Council President Person, I'm going to announce that on April 7th, oh yeah, I got that one too, good. Okay, good, there's even one more. Okay, first I'll announce that on April 7th, there is a committee of the whole meeting, a long one. It's 4:30 p.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. And that'll be in the council chambers. 6 items on that agenda. Renton Airport issues briefing, which includes RNP, capital improvement, and tower in the FAA. The second item is Central Sound Aerospace Training Center update. The third item is F-line update. The fourth item is major maintenance projects update. The fifth item is follow-up to the February 26th financial sustainability discussion. And the sixth item is the Veterans Memorial Park update. And then thank you for pointing out that also on behalf of Mr. Person, I will announce that Monday, March 31st is a 5th Monday, so there's no council meeting that day. And that is all.
You're pretty busy there, Mr. Corner. Ms. Palmer.
Yes. The Transportation Committee will meet this Thursday, March 27th, from 4 to 5 in the council conference room. There are 4 items on the agenda. It must be airport time of the year. First one is an addendum to the BHC Inc. lease, LAG 93-004. Second is Bazair LLC lease amendment, 114 to LAG 12-004. Third is standard consultant agreement with URS for on-call architectural and engineering services, and that's at the airport. And fourth, emerging issues, including regional grant process update, Airport 820 building demolition update, airport blast fence replacement update, update on tower, control tower, and WashDOT 405 direct connector project. That's it.
You guys are gonna get all that done in an hour?
No, we usually go longer.
Some of it.
But if you're coming to the Transportation Committee, be ready to stay.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. All right, that brings us to our second audience comment. Anyone want to address the council that hasn't addressed the council? Mr. Olet? Well, hold up. Then the rest, you can just come up after Mr. Olet.
Thank you, Mr. Olet, from Renton. Just a quick one, and especially since the PSC representatives are here tonight, my observation relative to the undergrounding and the cost of it is, why does the whole line have to be underground? Why could only be a portion of it through the residential or urban areas be undergrounded, where there's more impact? In other words, whether it be the M line or the L line or wherever it is, especially when it goes from Talbot Hill through Renton someplace, that's a portion might be worthwhile for Renton. You may not have the ability to force PSC, but as far as your permitting is concerned, you might be able to say, okay, we'll pay for the undergrounding through Renton, if that's the case. That's an observation. Thank you.
Ms. Peterson?
Inez Peterson, Renton attorney and editor of the Underdog Law Report to the Council. there's been such excellent comments tonight about the project, but I want to hearken back to the Highlands attempted declaration of blight for possibly some parallels. The first thing was the way the meetings were held. You went into the room and there were all these different stations, so nobody heard anybody else's ideas and no one heard anybody else's answers. And it just wasn't very conducive to raising the awareness of the whole public as far as public comment and public participation goes. I don't know if this upcoming meeting is in that format, but it just didn't seem like it was the best to spread the information out and to benefit from everybody's questions, as evidenced tonight. The comments have been exceedingly wonderful tonight. The other thing is the citizen committee. Now, back in the Highlands Community Association days when they had that citizen committee, the planners used the Delphi technique to control the meetings. That's not appropriate. And the third thing is meeting one-on-one. It almost smacks of trying to avoid public notice and public comment by meeting with you one-on-one so that there didn't have to be public notice. I think there's a general feeling that we would have liked to have been involved much earlier in this discussion. Thank you.
My name is Jean Demund, D-E-M-U-N-D. I live at 2811 Mountain View Avenue North. I'd like to make a few comments on the Energize East Side project. I think I have 5 comments. They're unrelated, so I'll just start off with number 1. After thanking you all for having this hearing. Mr. Wappler said they're impartial to the outcome. I believe that that is only because they want to use both routes sooner or later. Nobody spends $13 million on a right-of-way that they are impartial towards. Number 2, although I've lived in Washington for quite some time and on the east side and have been paying my electric bill to PSE for quite a while, the name Puget Sound Energy always led me to believe that they were some kind of public entity, but they're not. They're a profit-making entity. And in my conversation with Seattle City Light transmission engineers, I learned, interestingly enough, that transmission lines can be used as a revenue-generating facility when carrying power on behalf of other generating entities when they need to reroute their power due to maintenance schedules, et cetera, et cetera. So it's easy to see why the incentive exists for increasing power carrying capability. It is a money-making operation for this large private company who supplies us power. In the Renton Reporter article that many of you may have read regarding the Energize East Side process, I think there was a very honest statement by PSE that basically we're having this public process and then we will do what we decide to do. That doesn't sound to me like a true public process. My next comment relates to the public process and my understanding based on reading the Energize East Side website and comments by folks who went to the first meeting. We will be seated at separate tables, that is the process, and asked to state our values relating to issues surrounding this project. And then, at the same meeting, with our very general backgrounds, non-specific, non-technical, to create measures for those values. And then there will be some kind of numerical calculation, numerical formula developed that will provide an aura of a quantitatively arrived at decision for one of these routes. And I see that as a screen for PSE to hide behind when the nut cutting comes and they have to pick a route for this current round of power generation expansion. And finally, in my conversation with the Seattle City Light transmission engineer who covers this area, I was told that although he had not been party to any discussions regarding this specific project, that in general, Seattle City Light bought their right-of-way 80 years ago when there were virtually no homes along the right-of-way, and they bought way more capacity than they needed at that time. It was a time of very, very rapid growth, much more rapid than today, and they had the foresight to overbuy. They still have substantial excess carrying capacity, but they are not at all interested in sharing. As a public entity and as a public power supplier, we need to apply pressure to get these organizations to work together, to not hoard their resources at the expense of the ratepayers. Thank you very much.
I'm Paul Sigmund. I live, Randy, S-I-E-G-M-U-N-D, and I live in Renton. Apologize, I didn't know about the sign-in process beforehand, so I'll try to keep this down to about 3 minutes. To talk about Energize East Side, I've lived in Renton for 5 years. Before that, for 12, I lived in the north end of Bellevue at the bottom of Bridle Trails Park, a few blocks from the a few blocks from the Seattle City Light Bonneville right-of-way, and about a quarter mile or more from the PSE right-of-way. I'm also a long-distance trail runner, and I know every inch of all three of these potential routes from running them, with the exception of a handful of encroached areas in Somerset that you can't get through. 2 points on choice of routes. If you accept the premise that PSE needs more capacity running from north to south, Mr. Corman, you raised an interesting point about bringing it in from the east that I hadn't thought about. If you accept the premise that capacity needs to get from south on Talbot Hill to a midpoint in Factoria where there's an existing substation, to an area at the north near Overlake Christian Church, the Willows Road, Redmond, Sammamish area, choosing among the three potential routes, if you said you were going to do a trade study, running along the lake as an option doesn't even seem to rise to the level of bizarre. If you look at what goes along the railroad right-of-way now, we've got trees, we've got a beautiful piece of lengthy property whose future use is in dispute. I would propose the city stay within its legal and not necessarily regulatory authority. It suggests you offer a resolution expressing disapproval of anything major that gets built in the railroad right-of-way that would limit other options for what might be built while decisions are still being made. And there's no way that the light rail versus heavy rail versus recreational use versus bike versus walk versus utilities versus sewers versus anything you can think of will be decided anywhere near on the late 2014 decision timeline that Puget Sound Energy needs. Second point to that, if you look at the comparison between routes L and routes M, which is what I came prepared to talk about this evening, Route M currently has 2 transmission lines running in it. These are 2 sets of 3 conductors, each carrying 115,000 volts on a pair of parallel running, they call them H-trusses, the big wooden trusses that are about 75 feet tall. PSE's proposal that Andy Wappler shared with us at a Kennydale Neighborhood Association meeting would be to replace those 2 parallel sets with a single, slightly taller, somewhat taller, metal tower that hangs 6 conductors from it. The net result of a change would be, voila, 6 wires, changing from already 6 wires. 3 of them would be up higher. They'd be running 230,000 volts instead of 115. An electrophysicist or an electrical systems engineer, which I am not, could do the calculation to determine the effect of increased voltage countered by increased height for EMFs on the ground. I simply don't know the answer to that. But the aesthetics of taking away 2 old sets of wooden towers and replacing them with 1 metal one seems arguably a bit of a gain, not much of a loss if it's anything at all. PSE's contractor that I spoke to at the last meeting talked about the difficulty of doing construction there, as some of the towers are marooned by neighborhoods that have been built around them. I'd caution that doesn't need to be a discriminator, because those are old wooden towers that are built somewhere between the 30s and the 50s, they're going to need replacing anyway. So whether you build a new transmission line, new metal towers in that spot, or now, or you eventually wait until you get around to replacing a bunch of wooden ones, you're going to be there at some point, eventually. There's also the consideration of, I'll make this final point, aesthetic views from the shoreline. Right now, if you ran these new lines in the railroad right-of-way, you'd be removing trees, you'd be putting tall towers, all of which there are none now. 6 lines versus 6 lines on one corridor, no lines versus 3 lines, and huge towers on the other. Also, I'm a kayak paddler, and I love the Renton waterfront, all of Lake Washington, every inch of that too. This is the beautiful spot. Nobody's looking at large towers along the edge of Lake Washington. There's some places in Europe, particularly Switzerland, that people think of as beautiful, but their lake shores have been ruined by triple and quadruple track rail lines and enormous power transmission lines built along lake shores. We don't need to do that. If you choose L versus M looks easy and L looks kind of stupid. Also, though, consider maybe there is a case for undergrounding or coming in from the east. Bellevue is the problem you're trying to solve. Renton is not. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Mr. McCumber.
Howard McCumber, live in the Renton Highlands. A couple of points were brought up. One is EMF. EMF is an interesting thing. I'm old. We'll start with that. And I can remember when my children were young, and I thought old then, all this stuff by cigarette companies where they hired all kinds of people to explain to us very clearly that there was no connection between cigarettes and cancer. And if you're my age, have heard all that stuff, we could still know the jingles of all the tobacco ads. Frank Moss, who was my senator back in Utah, co-sponsored a bill that passed that took television ads for cigarettes off the air. Good idea. Now we have all sorts of stuff. But the question isn't whether cancer is caused by cigarettes or not. It always did cause cancer, and the boys who ran it always knew it, period. Number 2, we got EMFs. Now, my people in the Highlands are precious to me. And EMFs, I think, need to be looked at carefully. And I think the other thing is, I realize Paul's a great man here, but he's playing to their game. Throw one side or the other. I'm not going to throw Lake Washington under the bridge or under a bus. I think we need to look forward for the people. Our concern is the people. That's our number one concern. The number one concern for the people on the council are the people of Renton, the residents here, taking care of them. That's our number one concern. And we have a very efficient city government. We saw a couple of things earlier today. Jay Covington is probably the most capable administrator that we could ever hope for. I'm thankful for him and for his very efficient staff. Great staff, love them. But you guys, the ones who make the greatest influence on policy. You're the policy makers. And I think that united we could say to the Puget Sound Energy, with all respect, 2 things. Number 1, hold real meetings, not psychologically engineered meetings. We've been through that, thanks. Don't need it. We want to have straight meetings. We want to have more communication open, and we're going to communicate between ourselves. And this is a city of volunteers. We're not going to sit by for anything, period. Won't happen. Not going to happen here. And we have active people up here who are going to watch after our interests and the interests of the people in the bottom half of the median income is just as important as the people at the top. We're all important. Everybody here is equally precious to God. Thank you.
What's the wish of the council?
My name is Brian Miller. I'm a resident of Kennydale and have been for 40 years. Permitting. It seems strange to me that we say we have no ability to affect the permitting for the PSC, because I know if I want to build something on my lot, there's all sorts of permitting that has to happen, and it's a hassle. Seems to me that there could be a big hassle.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Seems to me there could be a big hassle for the PSE if we didn't want to issue a permit. Secondly, technology. We want to stick wires on poles like we did in the late 1800s. It seems to me that technology has come a long way. We don't have to do that anymore and pollute the whole city with more stuff hanging over the city. Undergrounding seems like a great option, or any other option. PSC, of course, is for profit, so they don't want to go underground. And if they do go underground, they want to put all the costs on us. It seems to me that if they are getting benefit from going underground by having fewer repairs that have to be made, it does benefit the whole community, and those can be passed on to others. And of course, they did the studies that show us now that it's going to cost us $20 million a mile. Maybe there should be another study. Maybe it would be a lot less than that, really. And I've also read that there's, if you're into the electromagnetic field deal, that there's less electromagnetic fields coming from underground wires that reach the surface and affect the public than overhead. Thank you.
You've seen my face before. I'm Sally McCrae, emboldened to come up again and finish what I was saying by my fellow citizens here. So what I didn't finish was that when PSE talks about environmental impact, I'd like you to listen to what the neighborhoods along these lines say is the biggest environmental impact. And what I'm hearing from people talking today is that they feel that the least environmental impact would be for Renton not to bear the brunt of supplying the power needs for the rest of the region, or for the power needs that we do need to have running through our neighborhoods that be run underground. There's lots that you can read about underground technology, but the point has been made. Of course, you're not going to underground the lines that are going across the mountains. But where other cities are doing their undergrounding is within their cities. And there are new technologies for undergrounding that don't cost as much as what the technology of 20 years ago was. We need to do this, and I want to challenge you, the Renton City Council, to look to see how did Mercer Island accomplish this. When I asked my friends who live on Mercer Island, how did you make the lemonade out of the lemons? They said, we went in force. We went in numbers to our city council and we demanded that they achieve a solution that worked for our neighborhoods, something that would, in fact, give us a mitigation and a return. I believe that you should really think about whether or not you have more power than you think you do, because we as your citizens don't have another place to turn to. We need your help, and we need you to stand up for us, not work hand in hand with a company. Yes, I want to buy electricity, and I have a municipally, I have a monopoly in Puget Sound Energy that is condoned by the municipality. I do not have another option of who to buy my electricity from. You, Renton, and Bellevue have given Puget Sound Energy a monopoly in selling energy to me. So I want to make sure that they aren't doing me a favor by providing me energy. I need to and want to buy energy, but they should do so within the confines that the municipalities allow them to do so. Thank you.
What's the wish of the council?
Move we adjourn. Second?
Moved by Ms. Breyer, seconded by Ms. Palmer, that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it, we are adjourned.
Neighborhoods healthier. Find out how you can help at letsdothiskingcounty.org.